The knock came sharp, insistent, and so out of place in the stillness of my Saturday morning that I froze, my hand halfway to my coffee mug. It was 10 a.m. in Boise, Idaho, and the sun filtered softly through the blinds of my tidy little craftsman home. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wasn't even dressed yet. My heart raced as the knocking came again, louder this time, almost angry. I padded softly across the hardwood floor and peered through the peephole. My stomach clenched. There, standing side by side on my porch, as if they had every right to be there, were my mother and Leonard. I hadn't seen either of them in nearly 15 years. They looked older, of course. My mother's once vibrant red hair was now streaked with gray, her expression as sharp and cold as I remembered. Leonard stood stiffly next to her, his narrow frame and pursed lips as smug and superior as ever. I debated not opening the door. Every fiber of my body screamed at me to let them stand there in the cold morning air and wonder why I didn't answer. But some foolish, tiny part of me wanted to know what they possibly could want after all these years. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and cracked it open just an inch. "What do you want?" My voice was flat, guarded. Leonard didn't even bother with pleasantries. He pushed the door open farther and stepped inside, brushing past me as though he still had any right to. My mother followed without a word. I didn't move to stop them. I stood frozen in place, heart hammering, the cold draft from outside curling around my bare feet. "We heard about your promotion," Leonard said briskly, as though we'd spoken yesterday. "You're finally doing something with yourself. About time, really." My eyes narrowed. I said nothing. My mother shifted her weight, clasping her hands tightly in front of her as if rehearsing some sympathetic act. "The twins are starting college soon," she said smoothly, "and we've hit a bit of a rough patch financially. We figured since you're doing so well now, you could help out with their expenses." I stared at them. The audacity, the sheer gall of these people was staggering. After 15 years of nothing, no calls, no letters, no birthday cards, not even a single apology, they were standing in my home demanding money. "Are you serious?" I whispered, my voice low and trembling with a fury I barely contained. Leonard's mouth tightened into what might have been a smile if it weren't so bitter. "You're making good money now, aren't you? Don't act like you can't afford it. You don't have kids. You don't have a family to take care of. You've got the money." I took a step back, still stunned by the surrealness of it all. I could hear my pulse thudding in my ears. For a split second, I wasn't standing in my living room in Boise. I was 16 again, standing in that cold, unfamiliar space when they had sat me down and told me I didn't belong anymore. I shook my head, breath catching painfully in my throat. "It's not about whether I can afford it," I said hoarsely. "It's about the fact that you both have done absolutely nothing for me. And now you stand here, asking for a handout like I owe you something." My mother sighed heavily, her face twisting into that all-too-familiar look of exasperation. "Here we go again. You're going to play the victim now. Poor Sienna, the neglected daughter. Get over yourself. Look at you. You turned out fine." I stared at her, stunned, rage and disbelief crashing over me like a tidal wave. The memory of that night when I was 16 burned sharp and fresh again. The night they tossed me aside like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. My voice hardened. "I turned out fine in spite of you, not because of you." Their expressions flickered, momentarily caught off guard by the venom in my words. I straightened my shoulders. "You want my help?" I whispered, icy calm sliding over my shaking frame. "Let me tell you a story first. I was born in Boise, Idaho in the fall of 1991, to a mother who was barely 20 years old and very much alone. My father? I never knew him. According to my mother, Carolyn, he walked away the moment she told him she was pregnant. No drama, no second thoughts, just gone. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment above my grandparents' garage. The place smelled faintly of cedar and motor oil. The walls were thin, and I could hear every creak of the old stairs when my grandfather came up to check on us. Despite how small and modest it was home. My grandparents, Edward and June Dalton, were my true anchors. My grandfather was retired military, stoic, disciplined, but with a soft spot a mile wide when it came to me. My grandmother had the patience of a saint. They provided stability when my mother was drowning under school and 2 part-time jobs. My mother was determined, I'll give her that. She juggled nursing classes at Boise State and work as a receptionist at a local clinic. There were nights when I would fall asleep listening to the soft hum of her typewriter or the quiet shuffle of her textbooks, turning pages under the flicker of a cheap desk lamp. Those early years were actually good. I didn't know we were poor. My grandparents made everything feel safe, and my mother, despite her exhaustion, always made time for bedtime stories and Sunday walks in the park. I remember the way she used to braid my hair and tell me about the bright future she was building for the both of us. We would walk to and Morrison Park and sit on the grass under the enormous weeping willows. I would chatter about my day at kindergarten, and she would listen, smiling as if nothing else in the world mattered. For a long time, I truly believed we were a team, me and Mom against the world. But life has a funny way of shifting under your feet when you least expect it. When I was 8 years old, my mother started talking about someone new she'd met. His name was Leonard. She met him at the physical therapy clinic where she had just started working after graduating. I remember the first time she introduced us. Leonard was tall, thin, with dark, neatly combed hair and glasses that made him look colder than he probably intended. He shook my tiny hand with the stiffness of someone meeting a stranger, not a child who might someday become family. He was polite, distant, and in every way detached. He didn't ruffle my hair. He didn't kneel down to my eye level. He didn't even ask me a single question. He just nodded, said, "Nice to meet you, Sienna," and sat next to my mother at the dining table, already claiming the space. I had no reason to dislike him at first, but I noticed small things. How my mother's attention slowly began to drift. How dinners, once full of her questions and laughter, became quieter, more subdued. She started missing our Saturday park walks. Bedtime stories became hurried or forgotten altogether. At 8, you don't really understand the complexities of adult relationships. All I knew was that my place, once so secure in my mother's orbit, was quietly being reassigned. They dated for 2 years. The entire time I tried to convince myself it was fine, that once the excitement of a new relationship wore off, things would return to how they were. They didn't. In the summer of 2005, when I was nearly 13, my mother married Leonard in a small ceremony in the backyard of our grandparents' house. I stood awkwardly in a pale blue dress, clutching a bouquet that felt too heavy for my tiny hands, watching them exchange vows under a cheap white arch covered in silk roses. That day was the last time I remember my mother truly looking at me with softness in her eyes. Afterward, everything changed. The first few months after the wedding weren't awful, just different. I still lived with them in the small house Leonard owned in Boise. My mother seemed happy, constantly busy redecorating, cooking elaborate meals for just the 2 of them, humming as she went about her day. I tried to hold onto the routine we'd once shared. I still left little drawings for her on the fridge, tried to talk to her after school about my teachers and friends. I still begged for those rare park walks that had once been our tradition, but the answers became shorter, the smiles thinner. More and more often, she was too tired, too distracted, too busy with Leonard's work schedule. Leonard, for his part, was never cruel, but he was never kind either. He treated me like a fixture in the house, a couch, a lamp. I was there, but invisible. Meals at the table became a cold ritual. Leonard and my mother would talk quietly about his projects, their weekend plans as work travel. I would sit silently, pushing peas around my plate, waiting for someone to notice me. They didn't. I started overachieving at school, desperately trying to get their attention. Straight A's, student awards, perfect behavior. Every report card I brought home was met with a disinterested "That's good, honey," from my mother, or just a nod from Leonard. The disconnect grew, slowly at first, then all at once. There was no dramatic fight, no tearful blow-up, just a quiet shutting of doors, a gradual fading of my existence in their lives. Then, in early spring of 2007, when I had just turned 15, my mother sat me down in the living room. I remember the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, striping the carpet in golden light. I knew something was coming. "I have news," she said almost nervously. "We're expecting." I blinked. Expecting what? She smiled tightly. "Twins. You're going to be a big sister." I stared at her, stunned. Somewhere deep inside me, hope flickered. Maybe this would bring us back together. Maybe she would need my help, and we could bond again. For the next several months, I leaned into the fantasy. I babysat for neighbors to practice. I researched how to swaddle newborns. I offered to help her around the house, cooked simple dinners so she could rest, but her belly grew and my presence shrank. Every conversation revolved around the babies. Every spare dollar was saved for their nursery, their clothes, their future. My existence became background noise. The dinners stopped altogether. Bedtime talks vanished. Inside jokes, silly rituals, even just a gentle hand brushing my hair away, all gone. By the time she reached her third trimester, I barely recognized the woman I once adored. The final blow came one night when I was helping fold tiny onesies in the laundry room. I asked timidly, "Mom, can we maybe go to the park again soon? Like we used to?" She barely looked up from the basket. "I don't have time for that anymore, Sienna. You're old enough to entertain yourself." Her words hit harder than any slap ever could. I stood there, holding a soft yellow blanket, realizing that I had been completely replaced by two people who hadn't even been born yet. I didn't cry. I just folded the last pair of socks and walked quietly back to my room. That night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I knew the truth. I was no longer part of her plans, and something inside me hardened forever. The twins arrived in late January of 2009. Max and Mia, tiny, red-faced, squirming bundles wrapped in soft pastel blankets. The house transformed overnight into something unrecognizable. Bottles, diapers, pacifiers scattered across every surface. Endless visitors with gifts and congratulations. Leonard beamed like he had won the lottery. I hovered at the edges of it all. At first, I tried. I offered to help warm bottles, fold tiny clothes, rock the babies to sleep when my mother was exhausted. But my hands were gently pushed aside again and again. My mother became a ghost of the woman I once knew. She spoke to me in clipped, distracted tones, her attention constantly shifting back to the twins. Leonard barely acknowledged me at all anymore. Family dinners? Gone. Movie nights? Forgotten. Even school events or awards I used to proudly announce went completely unnoticed. I once left my perfect report card on the kitchen counter for days. No one even moved it. I stopped trying. At school, I became a ghost too. I went through the motions. I excelled only out of sheer force of habit, not because anyone cared anymore. The hardest part was pretending I wasn't crushed. I remember walking home from school one crisp autumn afternoon, kicking dead leaves along the sidewalk, dreading the heavy silence that would greet me behind our front door. There were no more "Welcome home, sweetheart." No more warm hugs. Only the faint, constant cries of babies and closed doors. The final fracture happened on a cold night in July 2011. I had just turned 16. I came home from a shift at the local diner where I had started working weekends to save up for my own future. The house was quiet, too quiet. My mother and Leonard sat together on the couch, serious expressions painted across their faces. I froze. I knew something bad was coming. "Sienna, we need to talk," my mother said, her voice rehearsed and flat. Leonard leaned forward, elbows on his knees, a ledger of bills and spreadsheets spread out on the coffee table. Our expenses have increased dramatically with the twins, Leonard began, his tone cold and clinical. We simply can't afford to support 3 children anymore. I stared at them, my brain struggling to process what I was hearing. We've talked it over, my mother continued softly, and we think it's best if you go live with your grandparents for a while. They have more flexibility, and you're almost an adult anyway. My chest tightened. You're kicking me out. Leonard sighed impatiently. They deserve more. It's not fair for them to go without because we're stretched thin trying to support you too. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, watching as my childhood collapsed around me. Not once did they say, "We'll figure this out." Not once did they say, "We love you, we want you here." The message was clear. I was disposable. I walked silently to my room. I packed my small suitcase, a few clothes, my worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a photo of me and my grandparents from better days. I never looked back. The summer night air was cool as I walked alone down the dark suburban street, suitcase rattling behind me on cracked pavement. When I reached my grandparents' house, my grandfather threw open the door in shock. My grandmother wrapped me in her arms without asking a single question. They took me in without hesitation. But even as I stood safe under their warm roof, a cold, hollow place had already formed inside me. I realized that night I was truly on my own. The adjustment was brutal. My grandparents' house, small and cluttered with decades of memories, became my sanctuary. Their home smelled of lavender and old wood. The soft ticking of my grandmother's antique clock filled the silence that once had been my mother's voice. Edward and June Dalton did what they could. They were in their late 60s, living on fixed retirement income, yet they never hesitated to give me a place to stay. I had a warm bed, meals, and, for the first time in years, someone who actually looked me in the eyes and listened when I spoke. But even love has limits when measured against the weight of survival. I knew immediately that if I wanted a future, I would have to build it myself. At 16, I got my first official job at a small coffee shop a few blocks from my high school. The pay was minimum wage, the hours were long, and the customers were often rude. But that tiny paycheck meant I could buy school supplies, secondhand clothes, and contribute what little I could to my grandparents for groceries. I'd wake at 5:30 a.m., stumble into my uniform, and walk the half mile to open the shop by 6. After school, I'd head straight back for the evening rush, wiping tables until my feet ached. Homework got done at the kitchen table at midnight, my eyes heavy and hands stained with coffee grounds. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. There were nights when exhaustion won, and I'd wake up slumped over algebra textbooks with my grandmother gently laying a blanket over my shoulders. Despite the grind, I refused to let my grades slip too far. I stayed on track, fueled not by pride but by sheer defiance. I was going to graduate. I was going to make something of myself. What stung the most was the absolute silence from my mother. Not a phone call, not a text, not even a card on my 17th birthday. Through distant family gossip, I learned the twins were thriving. Max and Mia had everything: new clothes, private music lessons, birthday parties at indoor playgrounds, family trips to Disneyland. Meanwhile, I was rationing $20 paychecks to last a week. The unfairness burned in my chest, yet I kept going. I had no choice. My grandfather, who rarely showed emotion, would sometimes sit next to me after dinner and simply say, "You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for, kid." Those words became my armor. My senior year approached faster than I expected. College felt like an impossible dream. My grandparents barely had enough for groceries, let alone tuition. I had no savings. Still, I applied. I sat at the kitchen table night after night, filling out forms, writing essays under the flicker of the old overhead light. When the acceptance letter from Boise State University came, I cried. I had done it, but the joy was short-lived. Reality came crashing down. I couldn't afford it. I needed a cosigner for student loans. My heart clenched as I stared at my phone. Against every instinct screaming not to, I typed out a message to my mother. Hey, I've been accepted to Boise State. I'm so excited. I was wondering if you might be willing to help co-sign a student loan. I completely understand if you can't. I just don't know who else to ask. I stared at the blinking cursor for what felt like forever, then hit send. Hours passed. My stomach twisted with each minute. Finally, her reply came. Cold, clipped final. We're saving for the twins' future. We can't help. Sorry. That was it. No congratulations. No questions. No offer to even meet for coffee to talk. I sat in stunned silence. The lump in my throat swelled until I couldn't swallow. The tears came fast and hot. Not because I didn't expect it, but because some tiny, stupid part of me had still held on to hope. I put the phone down and whispered into the darkness, "You've made yourself clear." That night, I vowed that I would never ask her for anything again. I sat at the kitchen table long after the message from my mother faded from the screen. The silence in the room was deafening. The rejection wasn't new, but it was final. The next day, I told my grandparents what happened. My grandfather muttered something dark under his breath, pacing the length of the tiny living room. My grandmother hugged me tight, whispering, "You've done nothing wrong." But it was Aunt Linda, my mother's only sister, who truly saved me. I hadn't even considered asking her. She had 2 kids of her own and a modest job as a school librarian. I didn't want to burden her. But when she found out what had happened, she showed up at our door with fierce determination in her eyes. "I'll co-sign your loan," she said before I could even explain. "You deserve a shot." I blinked, stunned. "Linda, I can't ask you to do that," she waved me off. "You didn't ask. I'm offering. I've watched you fight your way through life when no child should have had to. I believe in you, Sienna. Always have." Her words cracked something in me that had been solid ice for years. I promised myself right then I would not let her down. College was brutal, but it was also the first time I tasted freedom. I majored in digital media and design, fueled by my love for creativity and the endless hours I'd spent teaching myself Photoshop and coding during high school to earn extra money. I worked 3 part-time jobs to cover books, food, rent, and anything the loans didn't cover. My typical week was a blur. Morning classes, late-night shifts at a diner, tutoring other students, weekend freelance projects, designing logos and websites for local businesses. I survived on caffeine, granola bars, and sheer stubbornness. Sleep became a distant memory. There were nights when I stared at my cracked laptop screen, fingers numb from typing, exhaustion making my vision blur. Yet I kept going. The alternative, giving up, was never an option. Sometimes Aunt Linda would send me a care package, a new pair of gloves for winter, a small box of cookies, a handwritten note that simply said, "I'm proud of you." Those tiny gestures meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. I avoided my mother entirely. I blocked her on social media, refusing to watch the shiny, perfect life she paraded online with Leonard and the twins. Birthdays came and went without so much as a text from her. I stopped caring. By my senior year, I had built a solid reputation as a freelance designer. My small portfolio had quietly grown into a steady side business. For the first time ever, I started believing I might actually have a chance. When graduation day arrived in May of 2018, I didn't send an invitation to my mother. She had forfeited the right to share that milestone. But Aunt Linda was there, sitting proudly in the front row in a simple navy dress, wiping away tears as my name was called. I walked across that stage in my worn, borrowed gown, feeling something unfamiliar yet powerful swell inside me. I had done it, not because of my mother, not because anyone handed me anything. I had built this with my own hands. As I hugged Aunt Linda afterward, I whispered, "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." Her reply came soft but firm. "You would have found a way even if I hadn't. I just gave you a little nudge. For the first time in a very, very long time, I believed her. Graduation was supposed to feel like the finish line. Instead, it was just the starting pistol. I packed my few belongings into the back seat of my beat-up Honda Civic and drove across town to a cramped studio apartment above a noisy pizza shop. The walls were thin. My mattress was nothing more than an air bed for the first 6 months. My furniture consisted of a folding table and a mismatched chair I found at a garage sale. But it was mine. I had traded safety for independence, and I relished every second of it. My first job was at a small marketing agency that specialized in local businesses. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and student loan payments, but I didn't care. I showed up early. I stayed late. I volunteered for projects no one else wanted. I lived on frozen dinners and discount instant coffee, barely scraping by while my student loan balance hovered over me like a shadow. The agency was chaotic, the clients demanding, and my coworkers rotated in and out like a revolving door. But I learned fast. There were nights I would get home so exhausted that I barely had the energy to shower before collapsing onto my air mattress. I kept freelancing on the side, building websites, designing logos, even doing social media campaigns for small restaurants and boutiques. Slowly, the money trickled in. Slowly, the panic of will I make rent this month started to fade. By 2020, I had leveraged my portfolio into a junior designer position at a much larger firm downtown. The moment I stepped into the sleek glass building on my first day, carrying my secondhand laptop and wearing my only decent blazer, I felt it. I was no longer surviving. I was moving forward. The new job came with a desk, business cards with my name, and health insurance, something I had never had growing up. I absorbed everything I could: marketing strategy, client presentations, project management software, leadership skills. I became known for never missing deadlines, for staying calm under pressure, for finding creative solutions no one else thought of. I avoided office drama, stayed out of gossip, and quietly built a reputation as the person who got things done. In 2022, I was promoted to project manager. It felt surreal. Me, the invisible daughter who had been pushed out to make room for someone else's perfect family, now running multi-million-dollar campaigns. I kept my personal life private. No big social media posts. No humble bragging. No flashy vacations. I had learned the hard way that attention always came with a price. The only person I shared my successes with was Aunt Linda. She was the one who had believed when no one else had. Every phone call, she would beam with pride. "I knew you'd make it," she'd say softly. I never told her how much I needed to hear those words. By 2024, I had been promoted again. Senior project manager at 33. The air mattress was long gone. My studio apartment had been replaced by a small but beautiful 2-bedroom home in a quiet Boise neighborhood. I had a real couch, real furniture. I even adopted a rescue dog, a scrappy little terrier mix named Jasper, who followed me everywhere. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful, stable mine. For the first time in my life, I had breathing room. And then one casual remark from Aunt Linda at a family barbecue changed everything. She had meant no harm. She had simply mentioned to a distant cousin, within earshot of my mother, that I had recently received another promotion and was doing really well at her firm. I didn't even know my mother had heard. I had no idea that this single innocent comment would be the spark that reignited a fire I thought I had long extinguished. The knock on my door came just days later. The knock came early Saturday morning, sharp and loud, dragging me from the soft warmth of Jasper curled at my feet. I blinked at the clock. 10 a.m. frowning. I padded barefoot to the front door, peered through the peephole, and froze. There they stood, Carolyn and Leonard, my mother and the man I had long since stopped thinking of as anything close to family. I hesitated, my pulse racing. Part of me wanted to ignore them, let them stand out there in the bright Boise sun, waiting for a door that would never open. But curiosity, that old familiar trait that had betrayed me so many times before, 1. I cracked the door open an inch. What do you want? I said flatly. Leonard didn't waste a second. He pushed past me into my living room as if it were still his house, as if 15 years of silence had never happened. My mother followed, closely behind him, not even offering a hello. The audacity left me speechless. We heard about your promotion, Leonard said briskly. You're finally doing something with yourself. About time. I stiffened. Carolyn shifted, her voice soft and sickeningly sweet. The twins are starting college. We've hit a rough patch. We figured since you're doing so well, you could help out. I stared at them, utterly stunned. 15 years of nothing, no birthday cards, no congratulations at graduation, no attempt at reconciliation. And now they were standing in my home, demanding money. Are you serious? My voice trembled with cold fury. Leonard folded his arms smugly. You don't have kids. You don't have a family. You've got the money. Don't act like you can't afford it. It's not about whether I can afford it, I snapped. It's about the fact that you did absolutely nothing for me, and now you think I owe you something? Carolyn rolled her eyes and threw her hands in the air. Oh, here we go again. Poor Sienna, the wounded child, playing the victim after all these years. Look at you, you turned out fine. The words hit like a slap. I clenched my fists at my sides, my voice low and shaking. I turned out fine in spite of you, not because of you. Leonard sneered. If anything, you should be thanking us. If we hadn't pushed you out, you wouldn't be where you are today. I inhaled sharply. My heart pounded. Thank you, I whispered, disbelief flooding my chest. You threw me away like garbage because I wasn't convenient anymore. You made it very clear that I didn't matter. And now you expect me to pay for the kids you actually cared about. Carolyn's expression hardened into ice. You're being selfish. Am I? I stepped closer, my voice cold and deadly calm. I worked 3 jobs through college. I graduated without a cent from you. I started with nothing. No home. No safety net. No support. I built everything I have without you. You don't get to come back now and pretend you're entitled to a single dollar. Leonard jabbed a finger toward me. You've always thought you were better than everyone else. You weren't important to this family then, and you're not important now. The words sliced deep, but I didn't let it show. Then why are you standing in my living room begging for money? I shot back, my voice steel. They stared at me, stunned. Carolyn's voice rose sharply. We didn't want to come here. Do you think we enjoy this? The twins deserve a future. And if you weren't so damn selfish, you'd see that. I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. You want to talk about selfish? I stepped closer, fury radiating off me. You threw your daughter out of the house at 16 to make room for your real family. You told me I wasn't worth the effort. Now you stand here and talk about what Max and Mia deserve. They deserve better parents. That's not my problem. Leonard took a step forward, voice low and threatening. You better watch your mouth. I didn't flinch. You are not my family, I said clearly, pulling out my phone and hovering my finger over the emergency call button. Family doesn't throw you out. Family doesn't abandon you and then crawl back only when they need something. Carolyn's face twisted with rage. Fine, be a selfish brat, but don't come crawling to us when your life falls apart. You think you're so much better? You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. I stared at her calmly. If you don't leave my house right now, I'm calling the police. Leonard scoffed. Go ahead. Call them. See how that looks. Throwing your own parents out. You're not my parents, I said softly. Not anymore. Carolyn grabbed his arm and muttered something under her breath. They turned, stormed toward the door. At the threshold, she spun back with one final glare. You're going to regret this. I met her gaze without blinking. No, I whispered, I won't. The door clicked shut behind them. For a long time, I stood there in the stillness of my living room, the phone still clenched tightly in my hand. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was free. I stood in my living room for a long time after they left, phone in hand, chest heaving quietly, Jasper curled protectively at my feet. For years I had imagined what that final confrontation might feel like. I had thought I would cry, rage, or collapse under the weight of it all. But instead I just felt relief. The next week passed quietly. I told no one. I poured myself into work, focusing on back-to-back projects and deadlines. I wanted to believe it was over. I should have known better. A week later, I walked into the office to find the reception staff pale and visibly shaken. My coworker Jordan pulled me aside. "Sienna, I don't know how to say this, but your mother showed up." My stomach dropped. "She stormed in here asking to speak to you," Jordan whispered. "When they told her you weren't here, she refused to leave. Started yelling about family obligations and how much she had sacrificed for you. Security had to escort her out." My face burned with shame and fury. I felt physically ill. The following morning, I requested a meeting with HR. Calmly, I explained everything. The history, the incident at my home, the outburst at my workplace. My HR representative, Carla, listened sympathetically and assured me they would add her and Leonard to the no admittance list for the building. But the pit in my stomach wouldn't leave. 2 days later, I came home from work to find her standing in my driveway, pacing, agitated, red-faced. The moment I stepped out of my car, she stormed toward me. "You can't ignore me forever," she snapped, pointing a trembling finger at my chest like I was a rebellious child again. I kept my distance, my heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" I said, quietly. "We need to talk," she barked. "You think you can walk away from your responsibilities? You're a selfish little brat. Everything I did for you, and this is how you repay me." My voice was cold and steady. "You're the parent, not me. The twins are your children. They're your responsibility, not mine." Her face contorted in fury. "I sacrificed everything for you," she shrieked. "And now you turn your back on us." "You didn't sacrifice anything for me," I shot back, voice rising. "You kicked me out like trash. You made your choice the day you told me I wasn't worth it. Go back to the perfect home you threw me out of and don't show up here again." Her shrill voice turned hysterical. "He's a brat!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, gesturing wildly toward me as our neighbors began stepping out onto their porches to watch the escalating scene. "He's always been a selfish little brat who doesn't care about anyone but himself." I could feel eyes on me from every direction. "I mean it, Mom," I warned as I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. "Stay back." "You wouldn't dare call the police on your own mother!" she shrieked, lunging toward me and trying to swipe the phone from my hand. I held it out of reach, keeping my distance as I repeated firmly, "Don't come any closer." Across the street, I heard a neighbor shout, "I'm calling the police. Leave her alone." The tension shattered as multiple neighbors emerged, edging closer, ready to intervene if she made another move. Just then the distant wail of sirens sliced through the air. Flashing red and blue lights painted the street as a police cruiser pulled up to the curb. 2 officers stepped out quickly, taking in the scene. My mother froze, her face wild and panicked. She struggled and shouted incoherently as they gently but firmly pulled her away from me. I stood there trembling, staring as they walked her to the squad car. My hands shook as I tried to steady my breathing. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just hope it would stop. The next morning, I drove straight to the Boise Police Department. I sat at a small metal table across from an officer named Reynolds, who listened calmly as I told him everything. The incident at my house, the ambush at my workplace, the screaming match in front of my neighbors. When I finished, he nodded. "You did the right thing by coming in." We began the paperwork for a restraining order. When I called my grandparents later that night and told them what happened, my grandfather swore under his breath for the first time in years. "She's lost her mind," he muttered. "I don't know what's wrong with her, but you don't deserve this." My grandmother's voice shook with emotion. "We should have done more for you back then. We stayed close, thinking we were helping, but we let you face too much alone. I'm so sorry." Tears pricked my eyes. "You did everything you could. You gave me a home when no one else did." My grandfather's tone hardened. "We've stood by her through everything, but this is the last straw. We're done. We're cutting ties." It was bittersweet. On one hand, I felt vindicated that they finally saw her for who she was. On the other, it hurt more than I wanted to admit. The restraining order was granted 2 weeks later, and for the first time in my life I felt safe. The restraining order worked. Weeks passed with no more knocks at my door, no more confrontations outside my office, no more phone calls from unlisted numbers. For the first time in my adult life, the background noise of anxiety was gone. I could breathe. I poured my energy into my career, my small but cozy home, and the circle of people who had always stood by me. My grandparents visited on weekends. We sat on my back porch drinking iced tea while Jasper chased squirrels around the yard. Aunt Linda called every Sunday evening like clockwork. Her voice, warm and steady, had been my anchor through storms I never thought I'd survive. I owed her everything, which is why I started planning. It wasn't about paying her back. There was no way I could ever truly repay what she had done for me. It was about showing her that someone in her life saw her sacrifices, her kindness, her unwavering loyalty. Aunt Linda had once confided that her dream was to take her family on a long weekend trip to Yellowstone National Park, but she had always put it off. The kids' tuition, car repairs, household expenses, her needs were always at the bottom of the list. So I made it happen. I saved. I researched. I booked everything quietly, the cabin, the park passes, even a small guided wildlife tour. One crisp autumn afternoon, I drove across town and handed her an envelope at her front door. She looked at me, confused. "Sienna, what's this?" "Open it," I smiled softly. Her hands trembled as she read the reservation details. Her breath caught. I don't understand." "It's for you. You've done everything for everyone else your entire life," I said, voice thick with emotion. "You deserve something good, something just for you." Her eyes filled instantly. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." I swallowed hard. "That's why you deserve it even more." She hugged me tight, silent tears running down her cheeks. I held her, feeling the weight of years of gratitude, finally finding a place to land. It wasn't just a gift. It was the closing of a painful chapter. Meanwhile, the only updates I heard about my mother and Leonard came from distant relatives. Their perfect bubble had finally burst. Financial trouble, legal fees, the twins struggling to adjust at college without the endless handouts they had grown used to. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt nothing. They had made their choices. I had made mine. For the first time, I realized I no longer needed their approval. I had stopped measuring my worth by people who were never capable of loving me the way I deserved. My home was filled with warmth, laughter, and loyalty, not obligation. I had built my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who showed up when it mattered. I stood on my front porch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the rolling Idaho foothills. Jasper leaned against my leg, tail wagging lazily. I smiled softly. I was free, not because they had left me, because I had chosen to leave them behind. I thought that was the end of it. I had closed the door. I had moved on. I had found peace, until one chilly evening in late November, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Max. Can we talk? I'd like to get to know you. You're my sister, and I don't know you at all." I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering above the keyboard, heart racing. Max. The same Max who had been the reason I was kicked out at 16. yet never his fault. The twins had been too young to understand what was happening back then. They had grown up under my mother and Leonard's warped version of the truth. Was this real? Was this a trap? Was this another manipulation? After minutes that felt like hours, I typed back, "What is this about?" Almost immediately, my phone rang. I hesitated, then answered. "Hi." Max's voice was hesitant, nervous. "I know this is random. I've been thinking about you for a while. I feel like I missed out on something important. You're my sister, and I know nothing about you. I hate that." I sat silently, shocked by the honesty in his voice. "I know what Mom and Leonard did to you," he continued. "I didn't understand it as a kid. I do now. It was wrong. I don't blame you for walking away. I wish it hadn't cost us two." I swallowed hard, blinking back sudden tears. "Max, none of that was your fault," I said quietly. "You didn't make those choices. They did." "I know," he whispered, "but I hate that we became strangers because of them. I'm not asking you to forgive them or reconnect with them. I just want to know you if you're open to it." I leaned back against my kitchen counter, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. For so long, I had only viewed Max and Mia as part of the family that had cast me aside. But hearing Max speak, I realized something I had never allowed myself to consider. They were victims too. They hadn't chosen this any more than I had. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Because I don't want us to be strangers forever," Max said earnestly. "I'm not asking for anything big. No money. No family reunions. Just a chance to get to know the person who's supposed to be my big sister." I stared at Jasper, sleeping peacefully on the rug, thinking. I had spent years shielding myself from anything tied to that part of my past. I had built walls so thick I never thought anyone from the other side could reach me again. And yet, Max's words were not manipulative. They were not demanding. They were just real. "I've spent a long time trying to move on from all of this," I said carefully. "It's not easy to open that door again." "I get that," Max replied quickly. "I'm not expecting anything. I just want to start somewhere." Silence hung between us. Finally, I exhaled slowly. "All right," I said. "We can start with a conversation." I could hear the relief in his voice. "Thank you. That's all I'm asking." We ended the call shortly after. I stood in my quiet home, phone still warm in my hand, emotions swirling in ways I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what would come of it. I wasn't ready to call it family. I wasn't ready to let down all my walls. But I was ready to take one small step. For the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward that didn't involve pain or bitterness. A soft ending. A clean breath after years of drowning. I had built my life without them. I didn't need their validation. I had my own worth, my own home, my own people. And maybe now, cautiously, I had one more person willing to meet me halfway. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, just out of the simple human desire to say, "I see you." I smiled faintly, stroked Jasper's head, and whispered to the quiet house, "Let's see where this goes."